But first up, as always, is the coup attack on the President of the United States, which is now in the Senate. The Senate's trial has technically begun, although the fireworks really begin next week. But the House, the Pelosi-Schiff coup cabal in the House, after delaying and obstructing justice, obstructing Congress for 4 weeks, the pressure politically for them to move became too difficult for them to deal with, so they finally gave the impeachment articles to the Senate. And you may have seen, this is supposed to be a sad day and done in all solemnity and everything like that. But instead you had Nancy Pelosi signing the impeachment articles or the resolutions associated with them with multiple pens, like some sort of big bill signing ceremony. It just shows you the political circus-like nature of this attack on the president. And I think it bears repeating that this is a sad day for our constitutional republic. This is another sad week for our constitutional republic. The president did nothing wrong. There's no basis for impeachment. No evidence of misconduct has been presented in these impeachment articles. So it's not even so much that there were no crimes that were committed. There was no misconduct of any type. Ethical, sometimes you can do something unethical. I could imagine potentially an impeachable offense that would not be an offense that violates a particular law, but there's no evidence any of this took place. And I want to go over this again because it's important, because the media wants you to forget it. They give you these, they slip you these pills, more or less propaganda-wise, and they want you to forget the reality that Ukraine is corrupt. Ukraine interfered in our elections in 2016 on the side of Hillary Clinton and to the detriment of President Trump, then candidate Trump. They were colluding with the Democratic National Committee to do so. They were colluding with the Obama White House to do so. And so the president, when this massive aid was disclosed or discussed in public in 2016, became concerned, why are we sending money to the corrupt Ukrainians? He also wanted to know, as he does on all issues related to foreign aid, what other countries are doing with respect to Ukraine. So he's asking questions about Ukrainian corruption in 2016, which, by the way, it became clear included protecting Joe Biden. As Joe Biden famously admitted in that video, he forced the firing of a prosecutor that coincidentally happened to be investigating his company, the son of his son's company, Hunter Biden's company. He was on the board of directors of a Ukrainian company, a gas company. Biden wasn't Ukrainian. He did not have the business acumen to be a board member, and it was clearly payments for improper purposes by a corrupt company that was under investigation. And Biden comes along and forces the firing explicitly by threatening to withhold aid. He says it in the meeting. He says it in the video. The president wouldn't be doing his job if he wasn't asking about Ukrainian corruption. And there's no evidence that it was for an improper purpose. No evidence. And the charge of obstruction of justice of Congress, so there's no abuse of power. I tell you what, if abuse of power, however ill-defined it is in this impeachment, becomes the new standard, under that standard, President Obama should have been and could have been impeached every week of his presidency. Every week of his presidency. He upended the rule of law every which way, on health care, on immigration, on foreign policy. He could have been impeached on Benghazi. He could have been impeached on IRS. He could have been impeached on Fast and Furious. He could have been impeached on Solyndra. He could have been impeached on Iran. He could have been impeached on Obamacare, where he was rewriting Obamacare contrary to law to try to protect it from being overturned. all sorts of abuses of power under the Democrats' theory of abuse of power. And the president here is doing his job, asking questions that resulted in a 6-week delay in aid going over to Ukraine. As far as I'm concerned, the president should call back the Ukrainians to find out what they are doing on this corruption issue. So that's where we stand. And of course, who's behind all of this? It's the Democratic Party. And of course, obviously the president's political opponents are going to be making trouble for him. I mean, that's the reality of politics in Washington, D.C. If it was a Democratic president, the Republicans would be trying to make trouble for them. But the question is there another reason other than just pure politics here? And I think there's corruption in the traditional sense of the word. They're trying to protect Joe Biden from any prosecution for the evident bribery extortion scheme that he seemingly admitted to. You've got all this Spygate corruption, this confirmation time and time again. The more we know, the worse it looks for the Obama gang in terms of their illicit spying on candidate Trump and then President Trump. You have the Hillary Clinton email scandal, the attendant national security scandal with that, and of course the pay-to-play scandal. It's all tied together. They don't want that to be pursued. So Trump's asking Ukraine about Clinton emails, Biden corruption, general Ukraine corruption in 2016, all of which happens to deal with something this establishment doesn't want to do. And for that, he's being punished with an illicit coup. And it's not about President Trump. Obviously it is. But it's also about your right to govern yourselves. Who do you want deciding who should be president of the United States? You, the American voter? Or a coup cabal in the House that abuses the powers entrusted to them by you and the Constitution to try to remove a sitting president from his position? Who decides? You know, you see this deep state attack on President Trump repeatedly. It's in the news almost every day. Leaks, most of which are criminal, about his internal communications or even communications with foreign leaders. And I tell you, my leftist friends, you think that Trump is the only person who's going to be victimized in the long run by this attitude? Oh no. You see this with Bernie Sanders. I guarantee you, if Bernie Sanders happens to win in November, I don't guarantee anything, but I suspect, if Bernie Sanders is, if he happens to win in November, I suspect the deep state will treat him as poorly or abuse him the way they've abused President Trump. You see this with the CNN game with Bernie Sanders this week. The establishment on the left, or the Democratic establishment, seemingly is trying to rig the elections to go after Sanders and help Joe Biden. So the deep state has their list, more or less, of acceptable politicians, and if you're on the list of unacceptable politicians, all bets are off. So you leftists cackling over the abuse of Donald Trump, I predict it will happen against one of your people, like Bernie Sanders or someone of that ilk, someone who's really far outside the mainstream from establishment thought here in Washington, D.C. So this is a danger to those of you who think of yourselves as liberals, Democrats, because there could be a president who runs afoul of the deep state and he will be undermined in illicit ways. Although to be fair, remember, the deep state ultimately is a tool of the left, and they will never go as far as what they've been trying to do with Donald Trump, put him in jail and remove him in a coup attack. So now the Senate has begun its trial. And as I said earlier, there will be the beginning arguments should happen next week. We still don't know exactly how it's going to work, but it looks like there is a merging majority for witnesses. And the question is, how is that going to work? Is it going to work for or against the President of the United States? Is he just going to have to suffer through witnesses that are brought in to attack him, or will they allow him to bring in witnesses to, for instance, justify his good faith reasons for asking questions about Ukraine? Witnesses like Hunter Biden. I suspect that's going to be difficult for him to get a majority to do. Virtually every major issue that pops up will be decided by the majority in the Senate. So when the senators tell you, or the lying liberal media tells you, that the senators are jurors, they're not jurors. Look it up in the Constitution. There's nothing that says they're jurors. I mean, there's an oath that's required to take where they're supposed to be fair, but they're not jurors. They're politicians. They're senators. They're operating always as senators. So they are the judge and the jury. And in many ways, the appeals court and Supreme Court, all wrapped up in one, because the Constitution gives the Senate the right to try the impeachment. The Senate, the President has announced, or it's been, I don't know if it's been announced officially, so it looks like Ken Starr is going to be on the team of the President's defense. Robert Ray was the former special counsel. So what had happened during the Clinton years, you had Starr pursue he was independent counsel, criminally investigating President Clinton and Hillary Clinton and others, obviously. And then he had the big impeachment report. And then Robert Ray became then after that happened, Starr essentially stepped down, and Ray came in and finished it up. So now the President has on his defense team two seasoned individuals, in the sense that it's pretty hard to match that experience. You have two top lawyers who were involved in an impeachment and/or criminal investigation of the President. So that's pretty significant experience to have. And then they also have Pat Cipollone, who is the White House counsel, and he's kind of an unknown quantity, at least publicly, as to what sort of lawyer he's going to be for the President at the impeachment trial. And the other big ad is Alan Dershowitz. Now, Alan Dershowitz is a liberal, but he's been forthright and on the really out there publicly defending the President from this abuse. You know, he's tried to be an honest liberal. Yes, there are honest liberals out there, intellectually honest liberals who don't agree with those of you who are conservative on public policy issues, but are concerned about what's happening in Washington, D.C. and concerned about the rule of law. So, and there are some other attorneys, I won't belabor the list there, but so they've got an experienced team. So my concern is, are they going to think outside the box? Are they prepared for what I believe will be more scorched earth tactics by the coup cabal? Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, he obviously wants something that's really quick, deals with the arguments, both for and against impeachment, and then kind of gets it out. Well, obviously the other side isn't going to want that to happen. And as I suggested, they have some Republicans who will allow them probably to bring in some witnesses. And then, of course, you've got the X factor. What do I mean by the X factor? I mean the Kavanaugh approach, where they bring in witnesses at the last minute. It doesn't matter about the truth or veracity of the witness or the credibility of the witness. And what they're going to try to do is blow up the process. Already on the Hill, you have leftist activists, the same groups that were involved in the Kavanaugh hearings, showing up in the Senate, conducting illegal demonstrations, taking over Senate offices. So you're going to have intimidation, And I was at the Kavanaugh hearings. And I wasn't intimidated, but you can bet senators were intimidated by this violence and intimidation, intimidatory tactics. You go to these hearings and they start screaming and yelling. It's extremely disruptive and dangerous because many of them didn't want to go out quietly. They had to be dragged out by the police, endangering the police themselves and people around them. Again, that's another memory hole the media wants you to never look down into, which is the abuse of the Senate, the effort to overturn and overthrow the Senate by trying to intimidate the senators into voting against Kavanaugh. And I fear it's going to happen again. It's already beginning to happen on the Hill. So what do you need to do? You need to call your senators, and you need to support the rule of law in the Senate. 202-225-3121. That's 202-225-3121. Other things that need to be done is that I believe the legal team should be thinking outside the box. There should not be a full-blown Senate trial. As those of you who have been following me probably remember, I don't believe the Senate trial rewards the coup cabal for the abuse of the president. So to a degree, they're still figuring out how to run this program. They should do what courts often do, have preliminary hearings where witnesses can come in and testify. And in this case, the witnesses should focus on the prosecutorial misconduct by Adam Schiff, whether he should even be an impeachment manager. I've said repeatedly the president should direct his attorneys to seek the removal of Adam Schiff as impeachment manager. Why? Because he's conflicted. Because he's a potential witness, and a significant one at that, given his involvement in the corrupt formation and corrupt pursuit of this coup attack on the president. It's pretty clear he's going to be a witness. And typically, lawyers who are witnesses can't participate in the case as lawyers. There's got to be a penalty. There's got to be accountability. There's got to be due process. None of that took place in the House. And is it going to take place in the Senate? So we'll see what happens next week. But in the meantime, you should be calling your senators. Let them know what you think about the rule of law, about giving the president due process. Are they going to give him the right to defend himself? Or are they just going to cave in to Democrat demands that they bring in more harassing witnesses? Well, you know how I think it's going to go. I've been opposed to this whole idea of a trial, a full-blown trial from the get-go. And I suspect the president will not be removed, but they're going to torture him through the process. And that's not right. And we should say no.
Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to catch all the latest news from Judicial Watch.